We made it to the 21st century. Yay, the 2000s. The 2000s are great. The 2000s were also not great in some ways. But when it came to fantasy fiction, fantastic. And here's my top 10 best fantasy novels from 2000 to 2009. So welcome back to Fantasy for the Ages. I'm Jim, the father of this show, and I'm here to continue my series of moving through the decades, the 10 best fantasy novels from each of these decades. There's already episodes out here on our channel all the way back in the 1950s, and then each decade moving forward. It's been fun talking about these, but now that I'm to the 2000s, there was someone else around in my life that I figure might show up. And maybe I should include here on the channel now. So let's get here. Zachary, co-host who was alive in the 2000s.
I semi-resent the way that you presented this because I was alive in the 90s, barely. But I mentioned
that in the 90s episode.
In the 2000s, I could read. So,
you could read, yes.
Now I'm valid to be here, I guess, because you were alive and reading in the 50s, obviously.
Yeah, no.
But
anyways, I'm still going to present my top 10 list of best fantasy novels, but Zach is here now to give his input. Some of you might define it as heckling. Some
probably going to disagree, honestly.
You might see that he completely thinks this is the best list ever. He has not seen the list ahead of time.
I have no idea what I'm about to see, and I'm just hoping some of the right things are there.
So we're going to find out and get Zach's live reactions as we go. Again, the 2000s, fantasy continued to pump out some great reads. And it hasn't slowed down. Each decade, we get more and more fantastic fantasy fiction. But wow, this time frame, some amazing books. And so I've got a great top 10 list. Let's get to it. Number 10, I have to go right back to that favorite series of mine that showed up quite prolifically in the 90s. So number 10 is Knife of Dreams, book 11 from Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, which came out in 2005. This book makes this list when others will not, because this is where we got past some time where Robert Jordan got a little lost, moving the narrative along and finally gave us sweet stuff, really clearly moving us towards the epic conclusion that was coming near. And Knife of Dreams, so good.
I'm really curious what's in your next 9 spots now, because to me, this is one of the best in the series.
Yeah.
So the fact that it only got the number 10 slot, and there might be 1 or 2 more from the Wheel of Time, even, what else is better for you?
All right, well, I'll give you a teaser. That's the only Wheel of Time on this decade's list.
That's fair, thinking about when things came out.
Now, keep in mind, things slowed down. So there weren't as many Wheel of Time books that came out in the 2000s. It was mostly the books of the slog. And we don't get another one in this decade. So,
yeah,
Knife of Dreams, that's number 10. Number 9, I get to introduce a book from another of my favorite series of all time in fantasy, Proven Guilty, book 8 of Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, which came out in 2006. Zach is frowning. The Dresden Files starts in 2000. So that's where the series began, and Proven Guilty is one of the stronger books in the series and makes my number 9.
I am sitting here going, if you put any of the books that take place before Proven Guilty on this list, I might be upset. Proven Guilty, it definitely isn't better than Knife of Dreams, but sure, you can put it where you want
it. It is the only Dresden File book that's going to show up on this top 10.
Okay.
So of all the ones that showed up in the 2000s, this one was the best. Number 8, World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War by Max Brooks, which came out in 2006. Perhaps the best zombie apocalypse book I've ever read.
Yeah, I didn't expect this book to be here. I'm not upset by it. I don't read a lot of zombie apocalypse. I've read this one. It's really good. Like,
Yeah, it would
there's
take
stuff.
such a unique take on how it plays it out. And of course, the book's written entirely in flashback. That's why it's an oral history as we get to piece
Honestly,
together what really happened.
the style of the writing makes the book. It's good.
Number 7, House of Chains, Book 4 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, which came out in 2002. Malazan got started in the 90s, the late 90s. It did not appear on that list because that's where we're dealing with books that I struggled with. They didn't rise high enough yet. But by the time we get to House of Chains, I'm digging this series. This is a really good book.
I expected to see this series. I don't know how many when they come out, so I don't know how many we're gonna see.
Well, number 6 is Memories of Ice, Book
There we go.
3 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, also by Stephen Erickson. This one came out in 2001. What I like about Memories of Ice is you've made it through Gardens of the Moon and Dead House Gates, and now you enter in a book that feels a little more like a cohesive narrative moving forward.
Oh, that's good.
It's tying together elements of things you learned in both the first 2 books and putting it together in a package and giving us a good story. It's still fully Malazan. It's still dense. There's still so much to it. But that's, of course, why we love Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Number 6. Number 5 on this list, I think you'll be excited about, Zach. The Blade Itself, Book 1 of Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy.
When did this come out?
Grimdark, and at a whole nother level. I already had Grimdark on the 90s list because of A Song of Ice and Fire. But now, wow, next tier. What do you think?
When did this come out?
2006.
Because my brain says the whole trilogy came out in this decade.
It may have. I believe you're right, but this, I think, is the best book of the trilogy.
I disagree wholeheartedly. I think they get better as they go. Some people think the second is the best. I actually like Last Argument of Kings even better. I loved the conclusion, but I would have taken Before They Are Hanged. The Blade Itself, I think, is the weakest of the 3.
Wow. It's my favorite. We will agree to disagree there.
I'm down with having Lord Grimdark in this list.
Okay, number 4 shows that I can't read my list well enough, and I lied because it's Deadbeat, Book 7 of Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, which came out in 2005. Deadbeat with a dinosaur running through the city of Chicago. It's hilarious, but it also advances the story in cool ways, including giving us Butters at a whole nother level. That's huge. Giving us Mouse. And I mean, there's just some real serious character introductions here as we advance the story, not to mention necromancers. So, Deadbeat.
The one takeaway that I'll give you here, I liked Lash in this book.
Lash, definitely. Lashiel. There's so many layers to Deadbeat. It's also highly entertaining. Number 3, we get back to more serious fantasy. Midnight Tides, Book 5 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. This came out in 2004. There's a lot of Malazan readers out there who do not rank Midnight Tides anywhere near as high as I do. But I really enjoyed it. It was a complete change of pace from anything that came in the first 4 books. It felt very traditional and a little more lighthearted in parts. The humor goes up a whole nother level as we're leaving everything we knew behind and going and learning about the Teist Idur and the Lethari Empire and another brand new continent. And I really enjoyed the story.
Like I said, I expected to see Malazan. This is the 3rd entry on this top 10 list.
And it is the last that's going to make it onto this decade. Number 2 returns to a series I introduced in the 90s. This one is A Storm of Swords, book 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. Martin, which came out in 2000. So I had book 1 and book 2 on my 90s list. Book 3 shows up right here, and it's high. I really appreciate what the narrative does in A Storm of Swords.
My disappointment on the fact that we're probably not getting any more books ever in this series has really just kind of like poisoned my view of it, because I unfairly don't love these books as much as I did when I read them, because I look at them and get disappointed. But I'm disappointed because they're very good. So it is valid.
Number 1 on my list. This might be one where more of you watching will go pick up a book and read it than anything else I've mentioned on the list, but Blade of Tyshal, book 2 of The Axe of Cain by Matthew Stover, which came out in 2001. Mind-blowingly good fantasy fiction. Heroes Die was high on my 90s list. That's book 1. Here's book 2. You gotta read The Axe of Cain.
I am so incredibly surprised and happy to see this. I don't remember all the books that came out in this decade for sure, mostly because I didn't read them in this decade.
That's true. You were reading Dick and Jane and Spot, and no, I mean, you read better fantasy than that at this age. You got up to age 11 in this decade.
By this decade, I had read Percy Jackson, but as far as I am aware, no, this is deserving of Spot 1. I think this is a fantastic book. It's probably one of the best written and best fantasy, maybe a little sci-fi
Definitely.
books that I've ever read.
It's shocking that The Axe of Cain gets so little love out in the fandom. People just don't know this exists. You have to check out this 4-book series. I talked about it, like I said, in the 90s. You've got 2 different parallel worlds going on. One very modern, high-tech, one very fantasy and magically based. And the people from the high-tech one can send people through a portal to the fantasy one, where they live out experiences, but they're really acting. And the people in the high-tech world are watching through their eyes, seeing the experiences, riding along as if they are those actors. But it's not acting. That's real stuff happening in the fantasy world. And some of it gets very, very dark. And The Blade of Tyshal, it opens up the story to new depths and new darkness that's happening, because there's definitely grimdark elements here in The Axe of Cain.
So ultimately, I don't agree with your whole list. I'm not surprised by most of your list, but I'm very happy with your number 1 slot, and I'm overall okay with at least saying this is a good representation of what you think is the best, and is not too far off, probably.
So let's say we got the Zach stamp of approval. There it is. Boom.
Like 50%, maybe.
Anything else you want to add? Is there a book you know came out in the 2000s that you'd say, I would have put this on a top 10?
I can't confidently say something didn't come out in 2011, and I will feel very dumb.
You say you read the Percy Jackson books,
yeah,
which means they came out in this decade.
Oh, for sure. They don't belong in a top 10 of fantasy books ever. Some people might disagree with me. I love the books. They don't belong on that list. I only get 10 slots. They don't belong.
All right. Well, there you go, everybody. There's our 2000s. Be sure to like this episode, help us spread the word, subscribe if you haven't, and definitely hit that notification button so you'll see when our next episode comes out, because we'll have the 2010s right around the corner. Be sure to come back to see more. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.